Good afternoon and welcome to another edition of Professor Speaks. My name is Alex Hernandez. Alongside me is Dr. Craig Stern of Pro Pharma Pharmaceutical Consultants and Pro Data Analytics. Today we're going to cover pharmacy benefit managers. It was announced last week that Amazon was going to enter the pharmacy benefit manager market, and people began speculating about how this could affect the business and how it could basically change the industry. Amazon has been successful in attacking the front end of drug chain stores, but now we're gonna see how they kind of introduce themselves into this market. Um, so first of all, I'm sure a lot of you are asking, what is a PBM? So Dr. Craig Stern, can you help me with that?
Yeah, it's funny. You said Dr. Craig Stern. He never calls me that during the day. Okay. From a business standpoint, a PBM is a middleman in between the payer, like an employer or a city, state, or county government, and the pharmacy. So PBMs effectively have contracts with pharmacies all across the United States. There's somewhere around 63,000 pharmacies that are independent, they're chain, they're mass media, or deep discount type of pharmacies. They have contracts with all of these, and effectively through online claim adjudication, or meaning at the time of point of sale, when someone comes to a pharmacy and presents a card that they have pharmacy benefits, the pharmacy dials into their computer and information goes through a switch and then to a PBM, and the PBM then comes back and says, yes, this person is covered, and yes, we're going to pay this amount of dollars for the prescription, and you need to collect X amount of copay, and if there are any benefit exclusions or otherwise, then they note that. So that's their role. It's a middleman job.
Okay. Well, what role do they play in the status of healthcare currently?
Yeah. PBMs are interesting. They started out as mail order facilities, then moved into claim adjudication. And today, most of what they do is electronic. It's sitting up on the web, or it's digital kind of work.
Okay.
They adjudicate a lot of claims because you're dealing with literally every health plan in general has a PBM. And the reason, there's a bunch of them. One is that if you are sending people to pharmacies all across the United States, and just for argument's sake, there's 63,000 pharmacies, you'd have to write 63,000 checks in order to pay them for all of the drugs that they were dispensing. So if you're a health plan or an employer or a group, you effectively contract with the PBM, and the PBM then pays all of these pharmacies so that you don't have to write what would be an enormous amount of work.
Right.
In dealing with that kind of thing. Number two is you'd have to sit down and you would have to contract with all these pharmacies. Now, granted, many of them are chain pharmacies, so you can contract with a Walgreens or a CVS or Rite Aid or whomever, and you could hit multiple pharmacies at one time. But there's still a lot of pharmacies to contract with and to pay. And then the second issue is that they deal with all of the benefit issues as we've talked about, but they also deal with negotiating with pharmaceutical manufacturers in order to get lower costs for drugs through rebates. So it's like a coupons or rebate kind of system where you, depending on the total volume of what you buy, you get a discount back so that you're not paying the full ticket price of a particular drug for that. And then they also have issues where they have mail order facilities, they have specialty pharmacy facilities,
Right.
and then a host of other clinical services that they provide to provide things for prior authorizations and management, and if it's Medicare or Medicaid, they also have all of those services as well. So there's a host of services that they're providing.
Wow. Just seems like a whole cobweb of it can go any which way direction.
Yeah, it can.
You mentioned it going from the PBMs, like from the health insurer to the PBM to the pharmacies. How does the drug manufacturers fit into this?
Well, historically, because the PBM has all of this volume of information about the number of prescriptions, they have submitted all of that to the manufacturers in order to get these rebates.
Okay.
And you clearly, in a very simplistic way, get more rebates if you have a larger volume of claims. There's a lot of nuances to the rebate issue, and it isn't germane to do here. If you're interested, I've written an article about it, about how it's really done from a accounting standpoint, so you may want to look at that on our webpage. But bottom line here is that the PBMs are acting as the middleman with the manufacturer. Today, however, there's been a huge argument that have gone on, and it's gone on for some time, but now it's rising even more, and that is the argument has always been about transparency. It's not necessarily what someone is doing, but rather what are they getting paid for it. And the transparency argument has gone with what do doctors charge and their inflation, hospitals and their costs, health plans and what their costs are, and clearly PBMs. And the question has been, many of the health plans have not done well from a financial standpoint. On the other hand, the PBMs have done much better. And so the question is why is the middleman doing better than the guy who's paying the bills? And so in that regard, there's been an issue with regard to transparency. Now, there's a big argument going on between pharmaceutical manufacturers who say that they are only increasing the cost of drugs a certain amount versus PBMs saying, no, it's not the PBMs, it's the manufacturer. The manufacturer saying the PBMs are keeping money. So there's a huge argument going on between them as to what it is. Now, the argument is nuanced in that many of the PBMs are owned by pharmacies. So while there is an argument between the two, and frankly, in a general way, they don't like each other, and they've never liked each other because the pharmacy has always thought that the PBM was extracting too much money from them, and the PBM was always concerned that the pharmacies were not following benefits, were not following what the benefit mandated.
Okay.
Either way, and there is truth on all sides.
Yeah.
But either way, the problem here is that manufacturers are increasing prices in many cases in a very coordinated, large profit motive measure. PBMs, on the other hand, keep money from the different drugs. It's been published that a PBM, for example, is keeping somewhere around $2.50 for every claim that they've negotiated for some particular categories of these drugs.
Okay. And
And so our question here is, who's responsible? And the answer is, because it's non-transparent, nobody knows.
so it's not really so much the drug cost for inflation, it's more the lack of transparency then.
Transparency is a problem.
Uh-huh.
Inflation is a huge issue. We can't deny that.
Okay.
And certainly manufacturers have a big role in that. They're arguing the PBMs also have a big role in that.
Uh-huh.
But the transparency then magnifies that argument while everybody's arguing, and no one really can say what the truth is.
All right. So in all of this, in all these situations, what made PBMs so powerful?
That's an interesting question. If you were just the vendor who interacted with the pharmacy and said, I'm going to pay you this much and collect this much, and I'm collecting whatever, $1 for every claim,
Uh-huh.
then everybody would know what the situation was, and there wouldn't be any type of argument. Today, however, there's a bunch of these fees that are hidden that no one knows.
Right.
And so as time has gone on, the PBMs have a lot of contracts with manufacturers that are not subject to disclosure.
Uh-huh.
There are agreements that they have over formularies and how they manage a formulary and what they get out of it. I've certainly published a lot of information, so have others, but they're probably picking up somewhere around 4% of the cost of managing a formulary, 4% of total spend. And a lot of others, and each PBM has a different model and they're dealing with it in a different way. But at the end of the day, they're working in a place where in one way, they know everything about what's going on with the contract with manufacturers and the pharmacy
Uh-huh.
and pharmacies, and the employer doesn't know. So there's this cognitive dissonance between what the employer knows not much of and the PBM who knows a lot of, and they don't communicate that information back because of contractual issues and the rest. So they have gained a significant amount of positional power in that regard. In some cases, different from other industries, where the vendor has a very fixed cost, is told what the cost is going to be, what their inflation is going to be every year, et cetera. In this particular case, they mandate what those fees are. And so as a result of that, the industry has to accept whatever they're given.
Oh, okay. Well, coming back full circle to what initially inspired this topic,
Mhm.
Amazon is like what trying to avoid the speculating part because that seems to be what everybody's doing right now. What role could Amazon play in the PBM business without too much speculation?
Actually, it's happening, it's in two areas. One
Right.
is what can they do right away? What can they do in the immediate case? And then what could they do speculatively? So
Okay.
if we keep those two separate, what they can do right away is that Amazon, as a technology disruptor of the industries, has the capability of cutting out a significant amount of the cost of purchasing drugs, distributing drugs, delivering drugs, all the logistics of drug dispensing.
Mm-hmm.
And because of volume, can cut that cost down to some degree.
Okay.
So they can deal with the logistics. Furthermore, with the PBM part of it, they can also deal with the electronic part, because now the electronic part is relatively uniform across the industry. There's computers, there's software to deal with it. You're not reinventing the wheel, so they can do that. And then depending on what kind of discounts they want to provide to the industry, they can do that. And then they have the capability of being more transparent, so that everybody knows what the costs are, and they're working on particular margins depending on what they have, so that they can disrupt it. Now, on the speculative side,
Right.
they are a disruptor. So as a disruptor, they have the capability of doing things per chance that others didn't, meaning they can take a look at the industry and they can say, well, we can change the way that drugs are delivered. We can deal with it, whether it's a robotic thing or whether it's by a drone or otherwise, they can deal with that.
Right.
In doing that, they can cut down significantly on things such as stockpiling of drugs, where people are getting 30 days, 90 days, or whatever of drugs,
Right.
but they're not using it terribly well. So they have these stockpiles of drugs that accumulates, and it happens a lot in specialty medications and even injectables, where people have these stockpiles and the dosage changed or the therapy is changed, and these quantities drive up. So there's some capability of dealing with compliance and stockpiling in a way in order to deal with that. There's also a capability where the Amazon could be a total disruptor in the business and take the business and say, okay, the way you guys have dealt with it, nobody understands what's going on. We're going to be totally transparent and let everybody know what the information is, and take some percentage that everybody knows what it is, and then it becomes a commodity and everybody then fights over whatever that cost is. The problem for many is that Amazon is big enough. It's certainly not big in the drug industry yet,
Right.
but it's big enough where it could come in and it could say, well, you know, the rules that you're using don't comply with 2017 and on, so I'm going to change the rules.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to turn this into something where cost of drugs, compliance with drugs, all of the issues with technology and mobile medicine to know what your blood pressure and pulse and temperature and all of that.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to incorporate that into the information so that doctors know more, the pharmacies know more, the patient knows more. And in effect, they could disrupt and effectively take the, if you will, the business middleman PBM and turn it into more of a direct from doctor, patient, manufacturer, and begin to move that whole process out as it becomes more transparent. So as a disruptor, they have a significant amount of capability in doing so.
You think Amazon's gonna like the term disruptor associated with it?
Well, there's a whole bunch of people, you know, the the people out of Harvard came up with disruptor, and people in business tend to think that that's a good thing. And
Right.
clearly, Amazon, Apple, Microsoft, and now all these social networking groups like we're talking to, everybody is a disruptor to some degree.
Right.
So being a disruptor these days is no longer a bad thing, like being a geek or being a nerd, which I grew up with as a pharmacist, as a physicist,
Right.
which was a bad thing at that time, but now today it seems to be a good thing.
Right.
So
It's the end thing now.
It's the end.
Yeah.
It's the end.
Well, so it's a shocking news, but it's also kind of refreshing because I know you and I both working in this field, you could see in the background the lack of transparency and how much an insurance provider is getting billed, and they don't know exactly why, they don't know how much they're getting billed, they don't know where everything's coming from. So seeing the transparency and what Amazon can provide, it's kind of refreshing. I'm interested to find out what it's going to be like. Anyways, that's it for today. Please visit propharmaconsultants.com and make sure to visit our RxInfoX page. It's a free information page. We'll have new videos every Wednesday at 12. And please like, share, and subscribe, and leave any comments below.